Okay, welcome back everyone to the final session of our workshop on using Earth observation for water quality monitoring. We're now going into our panel discussion. John Hicks, are you available to start your presentation? So we're just going to hear
Just need
from
to.
John Hicks from the DEFRA Earth Observation Centre of Excellence first, going to do a brief presentation introducing this session, and then we will move over to hear from our panel members in response to the suggestions and questions that have been coming in from Meeting Pulse. If you do have any last minute things you want to add to that, you can still go to Meeting Pulse, that's still live, you can still add questions.
Okay, so hello, and yeah, I'm John Hicks. I'm going to be introducing this final session. I won't be talking too much because we've got quite a lot of questions to answer. But I'll just give you a little introduction about myself. So I work in the Chief Scientific Advisor's Office in DEFRA. And for those of you who aren't aware what DEFRA is the Environment and Food and Water Affairs Policy Department in England. We have responsible for essentially water quality, farming, forestry, fisheries, you name it. We kind of have responsibility of it in terms of aspects of environmental use. I work on Earth observation policy, and I work in the Chief Scientific Advisor's Office, and the Chief Scientific Advisor's Office is obviously a bit of a cross-cutting area of DEFRA. We have interest in all aspects of science in the department. So Earth observation policy sits underneath there, which is quite good because Earth observation is quite cross-cutting across many different type of policy areas. So it's useful it sits in there, and within that kind of policy area, we are responsible for both Copernicus and GEO for the UK as well. We also look after policy directly for the Department of DEFRA itself. So GEO has also been mentioned already. I'm not going to go into that in any detail, but I'll cover a little bit on Copernicus a bit later as one of the questions that's come up. I also work in the Earth Observation Centre of Excellence, and again, that's been mentioned a couple of times. The EO Centre of Excellence was set up about 5 years ago. We had pockets of use of Earth observation in DEFRA and the wider agencies. And with the arrival of Sentinel-1 and 2 data, and suddenly the catalyst was there for us to start to increase the uptake and use of looking at where we can make Earth observation to have a big impact on the work we do in the department. Safe to say, 5 years on, there's been quite a lot of success with that. We've looked at a number of different areas. We've kind of set up through the work we've done for the R&D programs, looked at developing funding for Sentinel-1 and Sentinel-1-2 ARD, and that's really data. That's been used for a number of other projects, and we've kind of, I think, raised the profile of Earth observation in the department and also across central government as well. I think that's been one of the critical things. The Earth Observation Centre of Excellence, I should say, is made up of DEFRA bodies, but it's also got representation from the devolved administrations. So we have representatives from the Northern Irish, Welsh and Scottish governments, but we also have other parts of government bodies such as the Historic England, and other close working with the National Centre for Earth Observation and UK Space Agency. I lead on within the EO Centre of Excellence, EO Research and Development, so I'm the sort of project officer and leader for that, which is an interesting, challenging task. We have limited budgets for R&D, but where we try to make a difference is where we're looking at new areas where we can investigate where EO could be of relevance and use to different emerging policies, or areas where we think there could be a big cross-cutting impact. I was also the UK Copernicus User Forum co-lead, so I used to attend meetings in Brussels every quarter. Sadly not going to those at the moment, surprisingly, but it was a really useful way to share kind of UK interests and feedback on development of Copernicus and where we wanted it to go. I also was the kind of senior coordinator for the Copernicus Partnership Agreement, which this piece of work is being carried out under, and I'm really pleased to see this workshop. It has been really interesting the last 2 days, and yeah, well done to the team at JNCC for coordinating this, and for the presenters. I found it really interesting. So just to go a little bit about the last session. So As has been pointed out, we're going to discuss a number of different questions that have been raised and ideas, which hopefully you've all been submitting and have all been voting on. We're going to think about the developments in science presented and how we can maximise the use of these, and there's been some really good examples of that. The panel will be answering some of these questions raised during the workshop, and we'll also be seeing how we can get them to meet policy priorities, which is an area which we're going to touch on. And we want to know about the good examples which we can learn from. I think clear policy priorities, domestically and internationally, need to be looked at. There's probably seen some examples already. I think there's clearly some areas we can perhaps take and look forward to looking in more detail. So just want to touch before we go on to the questions about policy priorities on R&D. So I can only talk about DEFRA as a perspective, but I hope this echoes well for our devolved administrations as well, and other countries as well who may have a similar situation. So at least within the UK, our policy is going to be changing drastically with leaving the EU. We've got DEFRA bills going on agriculture and environment. While some things will probably remain the same, it's likely that other areas of policy will change in the near future and longer term. So having EO available is going to be critical for our delivering a lot of the work we need to do, both in terms of evidence-based policy, but also delivery. So as I've touched on, the DEFRA Observation Centre of Excellence has looked at a variety of policy areas in the past. So we're kind of interested in what is needed for water quality. So in the past, we've been looking at areas such as land use, habitat change and condition change. We've been touching on air quality. So I think there's lots of areas for growth in terms of water quality as well. And in November, we'll be having a meeting which will be a sort of follow-up to this meeting with various members of the Centre of Excellence and our water quality policy colleagues. So R&D is really important. It's not a solution itself, but it does help us provide our evidence about what we need to do in terms of policy development and also for deliveries. One of the challenges we have with R&D is that we have limited budgets, so we try to make a big impact with that R&D. So that requires us working with policy colleagues to find out exactly what it is they need to do and what they want. And that's a challenge. You know, often policy colleagues don't necessarily know what they want to try to achieve in terms of what's out there. And equally, from our perspective, we want to know what the requirements are from a policy perspective. So it's a bit of a, you know, a bottom down looking up, so bottom up and down looking sort of type of relationship. So yeah, it's a challenge to understand what the requirements are. And I think one of the things we have to do, both as within the Centre of Excellence, but also as scientists and evidence practitioners, is kind of trying to ask the right question about what the right evidence is they need. That includes a sort of what's the sort of quality they need, or what's missing, what do they need to answer the questions. And we need to kind of consider about what's already out there. Do we use what's an existing service? We've seen lots of services coming out from, you know, the Copernicus services are there to be used, and there's been some other examples presented. Or do we renew existing types of data that's been collected and improve on it? Or do we create something that's brand new? Now that could be a new data stream, it could be a new application. So all these sort of things we kind of have to consider. So this comes down to requirements again. And again, we need to think about these kind of situations. Are these direct observations required? Or are we looking for proxies? Or are we looking at kind of identifying risk factors, which could be a cause of water quality? And we need to think about the spatial and temporal elements of this. Are we reporting once a year? Do we need to look at changes over a longer period? Do we need to look at these at daily change? What is it we're after? And all these kind of requirements need to be factored in and need to be considered in terms of what we need. And also that helps the research community as well. And increasingly, I think the department is moving away. A lot of the things we're looking at, these aren't closed systems. We need to think a little bit more about, and there's this view now, which is not a revolutionary thought, but to have more of a systems thinking approach to how we look at science and data in the department. So just this last slide before we start the questions is, I was trying to find a good slide that represented not just the water cycle and water quality cycles. So there's lots of things on nitrogen cycles, lots of things on hydrological cycle. In the end, I used a slide from the EA looking at flooding, but I thought it was a good illustration of where we are going with in terms of systems approach and nature-based solutions in particular. And if we're looking at, let's take one aspect of water quality in terms of it could be the amount of water we have in rivers and flow rates, water storage. So if we're looking at uplands and peatlands, which has been touched on already, we're interested in making sure we have wet areas of peatland. It's good for carbon capture and storage. There's also a benefit in terms of biodiversity there, and there's also a benefit in terms of potential fire prevention and a fairly constant provision of water to the water course itself. So kind of thinking about areas of not just within our own domain of interest on water quality, but where there's broader impacts to other areas and policies is really important. And I think there's been some really nice examples of that we've seen over the last couple of days. And obviously, though we've touched on marine yesterday and water, there's that interaction between the near coastal areas, and from a perspective, not just DEFRA, but there's public health elements as well. We need to kind of consider those things. The Bathing Water Directorate is one area, and there's obviously economic impacts on that as well. So I just wanted to touch just quickly on the fact that when we think about policy now, we're not just and evidence, we're not just thinking about one immediate policy area. We need to think a bit more bigger about the interactions with other potential policies and other systems. So that's it from me. I just wanted to just touch on that, and I think really now we're probably given time, we need to move on to some of the questions that have been raised. So I think, Paul, I think it's over to you.
Thank you very much, John. That was an excellent introduction. And yeah, thank you to all our panelists whose names you can now see on the screen, and who some of them will be turning their webcams on as well to join us. So thanks for agreeing to take part in this. And I've seen some more suggestions have been coming into Meeting Pulse even as that presentation was going on. And thank you everyone for submitting them and voting for them. I'm going to take them in the order of votes, and we've got a very good one at the top here, and this kind of links back to Steve Grebb's talk about GeoAquaWatch. Had a good example of that there. How can we facilitate ongoing knowledge sharing between UK public sector bodies about how they are using off-the-shelf Copernicus products and services for water quality monitoring? So this workshop is a good start, but how do you keep that knowledge sharing going on? And if I may, can I go to Claire Neal from SEPA first with that question? Obviously, you're a very good example of knowledge sharing between academia, academic research and public sector. So it would be nice to get your insights from that point of view.
Yeah, thank you for putting me first. I have to drop out at 5 o'clock, so it's good that I have an opportunity to quickly give you my perspective. So for the people still in the workshop, I was actually a knowledge exchange fellow that came from the Satellite Applications Catapult and then NERC. And as I mentioned in my presentation, it really was a success of that knowledge exchange. And the key was really focusing on that co-development and that collaboration from the beginning, from the proposal stage all the way through to the research and then the outputs. So one of the sort of key points that I want to make is that moving forwards, I feel that the academic institutions should have some focus on including dedicated knowledge exchange fellows or roles within their grant proposals to ensure that there's at least an opportunity to facilitate the sharing of information rather than it being almost a sideline. So.
Okay, thank you very much, Claire. I would also like to ask John Hicks for any thoughts on this from the Centre of Excellence point of view, and also we have the implementation group. Do you think there can be a role in that respect?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we try to. It's one of those things. The Centre of Excellence is an excellent way of engaging with policy colleagues. I think that the problem we have there's probably the different levels of governance in terms of the implementation group. It's probably a better way to interact in a more direct way. I think where it works well with the Centre of Excellence is where we look at particular themes and bring in those people with relevance to that particular topic. I think it's about management and making sure we get the best of that time. So, you know, we've got a session on water quality coming up in November. That's we're currently going through the process of putting together the agenda for that. We'd love to have as many people as possible to that, but it's simply we need to be quite focused on what it is we need to look at in terms of the what the immediate policy issues are. But in saying that, there is no reason why these conversations can't continue when it's outside these meetings. I think it's really important to keep an eye on the kind of work that's going on, the activities on there. And you know, I'm really quite pleased to see the breadth of activities that are going on that's been demonstrated the last 2 days, and some stuff I wasn't even aware of. So it's really been useful to have these sorts of events. I think and there's probably something we need to do. We work in partnership with the National Centre for Earth Observation. Perhaps we need to work a little bit more, work out ways how we can share information between the academic and research community and ourselves.
Yes, but there are a lot of these channels and networks already out there. We have to make good use of those, don't we? Okay, thank you. I think Gwawa Jones, is there anything you'd like to comment on this from JNCC's role, given supporting the devolved administrations and sharing knowledge between them and also working with the overseas territories as well?
Yes, sure. So stressing the implementation group. So the implementation group is actually funded by the Copernicus User Uptake project at the moment, and JNCC has taken on the facilitation of that group. But we are starting now to enhance membership to that group, if you like. So it's not, you don't have to be a member of the public sector to participate. So we've already invited other members of the other research institute, for example. So PML are now members of that group, and we are definitely looking to expand membership of that group. Not everything we discuss can be openly discussed, but that's when we do a dual session and have an open session where everybody can contribute, and then we can throw everybody else that may have conflicts out to discuss public sector stuff as well. So it's a lot of variety within that group in terms of membership, and I think we can expand that to more research and even some commercial sector as well, if they have relevant information, tools, products, services to talk about. So something that we do a lot of at JNCC is trying to understand people's requirements and then fit solutions that may already exist out there to those requirements, or look to create new tools if that's the most suitable way forward. So there are organisations like us out there that are specifically well designed and placed to fill that gap. And yes, we do fulfil that function for our British overseas territories as well. Being a fully UK government advisory body allows us to do this. So having access to all the different devolved governments and the overseas territories puts us in a really, really good position to link things and projects and products and data together, which is one of the synergies with Earth observation data, because of course I think Steve Grebb pointed this out as well, that no political boundaries with Earth observation data. So what can be shared should be shared in terms of knowledge sharing, because we all benefit.
Thank you very much, Gwawa. That was an excellent point. And yeah, good to have that extra information about the implementation group. Of course, we did have a talk from someone in the private sector consultant in our last session, which was excellent as well. I think Stefan from PML has something he would like to add to this question.
Yes, it's just such a relevant point at the moment, so timely, because NERC has the Knowledge Exchange fellowship call open at the moment. So there might be people in the audience who think, that's me, I want to be that person making those links. So the door is wide open.
Okay, thank you very much. Is there anyone else who would like to comment on this question before we move on to some of the others?
Yes, it's Helena in Natural Resources Wales. I'd just like to briefly add that as well as the very crucial groups that we've just heard about, the UK EOF, the UK Environmental Observation Framework, which is the coordinating body across the public sector for the UK's environmental observation community is also setting up a remote sensing group, focusing particularly on satellites and drones, and where that group will differ and not duplicate with the Centre of Excellence is on this kind of specific subject matter.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much, Helena. And that reminds me, so we have this set of resources that we put together for this workshop, which is available to download from the website, and we're going to update that because a few more suggestions have come in that you should add this, and we will do that, and then we'll make that available when we put the slides and videos out next week. So thank you for that. Anyone else who would like to talk about this before we go on to one of the other questions? Okay. This is something that came up yesterday. I think I will go to John for this first of all, because it's the other thing that's got the most votes. Will the UK's departure from the EU have any impact at all on our ability to A, access and use Copernicus data and services for water quality monitoring applications, and B, influence future developments in data and service provision in this area? So that's specifically Copernicus.
Okay, I was waiting for the Copernicus question to come up at some point over the 2 days. It came in quicker than I was expecting. So I think it's just to perhaps to give you the latest information, what I'm allowed to share with you. So the UK has been talking to the EU about Copernicus as part of our broader free trade agreement discussions. There's been an area talking about various horizontal sort of positions with a variety of EU programs, including Horizon, and Copernicus is on there as well. But that needs to be a series of text agreed at the free trade agreement level. To get into specific parts of the individual programs, such as Copernicus, there will need to be a separate protocol that will need to be produced on that. So there has been discussions with the EU, both UK and EU set out their positions on Copernicus. It was a positive meeting, but I can't really say much more than that at the moment in terms of the future direction where we currently stand. But to kind of give a sense of what happens if we get no deal or no agreement on Copernicus, what does it mean that at the end of the transition period, what would we get, or what do we still have access to? So you still have access to 4 out of the 6 services. That would still remain. The only ones we wouldn't have automatic access to is the security service. The emergency mapping service is accessible via a slightly convoluted route, but it is potentially still possible. But the UK would still have access to the International Disaster Charter satellite data as well for in an event of an emergency. So we still have access to data for emergencies elsewhere. You would lose access to contributing mission data if we're no longer part of the programme as a third country. Obviously, there's another aspect in terms of contracts, which is a complicated issue, and I don't think it's really right. I can talk about it here if I'm sure people appreciate. I know that there are some people who are on this call who are already contracted to do work on some entrusted entities and elsewhere. But I think what I would say is that these organisations have been spoken to, and I think we are aware of the big challenges and issues that affect the UK and Copernicus. So yeah, it's I'd like to say more. I can't. What I would say is that so some stuff we would still have access to. So in terms of, I think from water quality, we still have access to the Copernicus Marine Environment Monitoring Service. We still have access to land service and the air quality and the climate change service. That doesn't change, is what I would say on that aspect. We still have access to the Sentinel data. Copernicus is still an open data, an open data where possible program. That hasn't changed. It may change in the future. That's always a risk, but as far as we know, and as far as my last time I was at any meetings, that was still the position of Copernicus. These sort of events wouldn't be happening if they wanted to kind of keep it all closed. I mean, the environmental data, it needs to be open. We need to work collectively, collaboratively. There's a big commitment to geo as well. So I think I would hope that things are okay, but I obviously can't say much more than that. But I hope that hopefully answers some of the questions, or maybe sort of put some of the issues to bed, at least.
Thank you very much, John. That was a very thorough answer, and as you say, I think this question does come up quite often at these type of events. So thank you for dealing with it. Shubha, did you have something you wanted to add to that? Were you indicating?
Thank you. Yes, thank you very much. If I could follow on with some comments from the perspective of a provider to Copernicus, which PML is very heavily involved in all this. So say, for example, the part that I was talking about, we are involved in the R&D through the ESA climate change initiatives and other initiatives. And we are also heavily involved in providing the Copernicus services, both CMEMS and C3S, the climate change service. If we leave without a trade agreement, I don't see how we can continue to be a contractor providing this information to Europe. So there's certainly for an organization such as PML that straddles the R&D and the service domains, there will be a definite financial impact. And it'll be a big one for a relatively small organization like PML. It would also threaten, if that's the right word that I can use, our leadership at the European level. Right now, there is a seamless transition from R&D to operational products. Now, if we retain our R&D through ESA, there won't be a pickup on the operational side because that contract would go to somebody else. So from a scientific R&D operational perspective, it has the potential to be a big mess.
Thank you very much, Shubha. That's very interesting to get the perspective of a supplier as well. And it sounds like we just really need to keep monitoring this situation over the coming months. Not that there is many months left now. And yeah, sorry to hear about obviously the potential impact on PML and on all of us for access to the products that you're creating. Because as I say, it's good to have that seamless link. The data, the products and services.
Excuse me, I use PML as an example because that's what I'm most familiar with. But it's UK overall. In general, we have quite a leadership role. We heard about the important role that Sterling is playing, for example, or University of Reading or University of Leicester. It's UK-wide problem.
Okay, thank you very much. And that has certainly added another perspective to that, so that's very helpful, thank you. Is there anyone else who'd like to say anything on that subject before we go on to one of the other questions and now look at one of the R&D issues? Okay, so the top sort of question or R&D priority is it seems that we need more and better in situ reference data to get a better understanding of uncertainty across all products and applications. Is that correct? How might we address this? And how is it best to communicate uncertainty to end users and other stakeholders? So I say in particular people who might be affected by decisions that are being made, enforcement decisions or regulations on the back of EO-derived products. And I would like to come to all of the people who are representing research institutions on the panel about this, but maybe if I start with Andrew.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's a straightforward question, but not necessarily a straightforward answer, but fundamental answer, a fundamental issue that we certainly do need to address. So where do we start? So yes, we need data desperately, and this whole concept of sharing data, as I illustrated in the first presentation, was really fundamental in enabling us to take that step change in exploiting satellite data for looking at inland water quality. So if we didn't have that partnership around the world where people shared data, we would be a long way behind in terms of where we are now. So that was really fundamental. But along with that, though, comes often clauses. So often in the case of Global Lakes, we approached a lot of people, and sometimes people were very happy to share their data, but with a condition. For example, that it's only a particular project can use that data and you can't share it elsewhere. So along with the LIMNADIS database that we developed came a data sharing policy as well, and people had to tick various boxes so that we knew how to treat that data. And that can be frustrating, particularly to other people who really want to get access to that data. So there are issues there in terms of how we overcome that or try and push a much more open data policy. And clearly people are happy to share the data, perhaps after they've actually published the data as well. So there's a time lag potential issue there as well. So this not a straightforward issue. And the other issues around that also are different ways in which data are collected. As I indicated in the presentation, we were taking data from other people, but in fact, sometimes data and the way it's collected or sampled, it isn't necessarily that comparable to the measurements we're making from space, for example. But there is perhaps a need for some kind of standardization so that we can try and get data sets which are at least comparable, even to the point where, as Claire said, that if you're taking a GPS coordinate for a position that you take the sample, that is indeed the position in which you took the sample, okay? Because that appears not to be always the case. So that makes that matchup quite difficult. So even very simple data protocols will be quite helpful in that context. But then we have the issues such as COVID, pandemics, in fact, where everyone stopped from actually collecting data to help with that validation. So there are other ways of actually collecting data as well that will enable us to really up the ante in terms of satellite validation, and that is the deployment, as also Stefan presented in his presentation, the deployment of in situ sensors, so that we have that constant data provision for places or points in the landscape or in the riverscape or the coastal environment or wherever. So we have a constant supply of data so that we know that data is collected when we have optimal conditions, for example, rather than waiting for someone to go out into the field and try and match it as close as we possibly can with that overpass. So one of the solutions is almost inevitably going to be the deployment of appropriate sensors which are well maintained and collect data in key locations in the landscape or wherever to help that validation work, particularly in these dynamic environments like estuaries and lakes and coastal environments in particular. So that will require an investment, and also an investment in terms of upkeep and maintenance. But that would be quite pioneering. And that is something, for example, we're trying to push forward in that fourth era example that I also demonstrated there later this afternoon. So yes, it's really important we share data, that we use, try and make sure the data is open for people to share to avoid any complexities and frustrations wherever possible. But ultimately, we will really get a major development going forward if we have a series of in situ sensors across the environment which enable us to help validate that satellite data at any time.
Okay.
I'm sure there's more to come in on that.
Yeah, thank you very much, Andrew. And I'm glad you picked up the point about the better recording coordinates of in situ sampling to match it up points with pixels, because that was something which came up as a question for Claire that we didn't manage to get to, but obviously we will try and deal with as well. So it's a very good point. And I would like to ask Shubha and also then Stefan, if you've got anything you'd like to add to this, and also the bit about how to communicate the uncertainty. We'll try to reduce uncertainty or better understand it, but how do we communicate it to end users?
Stefan, you want to go first?
Go ahead, Shubha, unless you want me to go first.
Go on.
Okay, so I thought I'd first touch on the point, is this indeed the issue? Is there not enough data? If you look at the LIMNADIS database for the optically complex water bodies, you can see that there are massive amounts of data. One issue is that they don't always match up with satellite observations, so then they have reduced value. I wouldn't say they're without value, because they still characterize the water body. Another point is that for the last 15-20 years or so, the research community has been focusing on water bodies with severe eutrophication issues. So we have massive amounts of data in the high chlorophyll range, targeting phytoplankton blooms in the field because they can be quite hard to catch. The downside of that is that if you look at the environments where the product uncertainties are actually highest, they are most poorly covered. So these are the water bodies that are in good conditions and that we should try and preserve in that condition, and are possibly still less costly to preserve. So there's an obvious gap there, which is almost frustrating because we make the largest errors in the water bodies that matter most. So I would say yes, data is needed, needs to be targeted, needs to be informed. So we are in a position using satellite data that can inform further data gathering in the field by the environment agencies and say where it would contribute mostly to our developments. And for that, we need a communication platform. Then how is the best way to address this? Well, there's a few obvious wins. If we want to have overlap between satellite observations and in situ sensors, those in situ sensors need to be fairly continuous and fairly smart so that we can guide them to take measurements when it's most useful. Because what we don't necessarily need is more data that we can't use. So say take a measurement every hour, and then when there's a satellite overpass, maybe every 10 seconds. I'll stop there because Shubha might be comfortable enough to speak on the issue on communicating uncertainty.
Okay. I honestly don't know how to improve our communication on that. In the projects that I'm involved with, we use the standard statistical metrics such as root mean square difference or bias when we report on uncertainties. Where I'm uncertain of is whether that is sufficient for the implementation agencies or whether we need to do something different. I don't know. The other thing too I would like to mention is that we are always hungry for in situ data to improve our products, to develop algorithms, to check the quality of the products, and then to give the uncertainty estimates. But we can and we do need to incorporate a range of methods from simple observations from citizen science all the way to sophisticated and precise hyperspectral kind of measurements that can be used for algorithm development. So there are R&D components that would be essential for further development of algorithms that would require in situ data. Then we need better dialogue with the user community, so we can be either assured that the uncertainties we provide are sufficient. If it's not, we need to know how to improve our products in that way.
Okay, thank you very much, both of you. So it's a good point that we're needing this two-way communication with users on, you know, are these measures like RMSD and bias good enough? Are they understood by people? And then also, but to tell people, for example, like the Environment Agency, to direct them to sample in a way and at a place that will be most useful. Andrew has messaged in the chat that he would like to add something. So just can I go to Andrew first and then to Gwawa? Is that okay? Thank you.
I think the key thing also in all this messaging is also to remember that the in situ measurements also carry an uncertainty, and that often gets forgotten and can account for much of the scatter that we see when we're looking at these match-up plots in particular. And that could be because of different ways of measuring the same variable, or could be the different ways in sampling, for example, or indeed preservation of the sample before they're measured. So it really is important that the uncertainty is also taken into account, and the in situ measurement, the sample measurement, as well as the Earth observation measurement. And that will then provide a real perspective in terms of that trust on that data as well, that still, as it came up in a previous comment, seems to be an issue for some in terms of holding people back in terms of using Earth observation data.
Thank you very much. That is, of course, a very, very good point. And I think Claire Neal did sort of mention about different sampling methods, different depths, and the effect of that. So that is very important that we remember that and communicate about it as well. Okay, can I go over to you now, Gwawa, to add to this point?
Yeah, it'll be quick so that we can move on to another question, but I just wanted to build on what Shubha was saying about the different types of QA, quality assurance, if you like, you know, from the citizen science to the really sophisticated algorithm. So the way I differentiate these are quantitative quality assurance or quality control versus qualitative. And I think the qualitative we're not doing enough of. And the qualitative could be as simple as teaching people how to interpret the outputs, because the visual element is one of the biggest, advantages of Earth observation data, the fact that you can visualize spatially what's going on, regardless of what type of Earth observation data you're using. And, you know, we're visualizing beyond the visible and other sorts of data like radar as well. You show a radar image in front of people and people will go, what am I looking at? So, you know, there's a whole bunch of qualitative stuff that we can do that might help people understand the quality of the data that they're looking at, that we're completely missing the point on as a community. Everybody is lacking on the quality assurance side. We could all do more, and it's not just about, you know, sophisticated algorithm development and in situ data collection. I think there has to be more user engagement with the people that would benefit from using these products.
Thank you very much. And I would just like to go to Helena Sykes from Natural Resources Wales, who would like to add something about communicating uncertainty.
Thanks, Paula. I think in the public sector, it's really important to remember that your end user who's using your product could be a member of the public accessing it on a website with no statistical knowledge. So the communication of uncertainty has to be completely transparent for all the communities you want to engage with. You might have your peer-reviewed paper with an error analysis, but you might have a coloured map on the website and everything in between. And crucially, you need the one to link to the other so that people can go up and down through the levels of details as they work with the product and the data.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much, Helena. And that's sort of what I was saying before about end users, that, you know, it's the people affected by decision making off the back of this information. It could be farmers, it will be fishermen, people who are being affected by decisions. So it needs to be understood by everyone. So thank you for adding that. I think Stefan has just one thing he wants to add.
Yes. Relatedly, the whole process needs to be transparent. So reporting an uncertainty that is alongside the end product provided to a user, whether they're an informed expert user or not, is not enough. The whole procedure, the algorithmic approach, and what has been done to calculate that uncertainty or model that uncertainty needs to be accessible as well. Otherwise, I recall an anecdote when we were comparing chlorophyll algorithms for the Baltic Sea. There were lots of differences and not enough in situ data to see which one was right. And it turned out that statistically, the best algorithm for the Baltic Sea is chlorophyll equals 3, which you wouldn't accept, but statistically it works. So yeah, there's a bit of a pitfall there. And we are struggling with this lack of in situ information to know what's closest to the truth always. So we need to make sure it's sensible throughout.
Okay, thank you very much, Stefan. I'm going to move on to another thing now. This is got a bit of application and R&D in it. So the application is using EO-derived products for freshwater nature conservation in general. And for this, we need research on the relationship between chlorophyll A measurements, which have come up, a lot of talks, and habitat condition in freshwater environments. So we've seen how we're getting better at measuring chlorophyll A, well, determining chlorophyll A quantities using remote sensing, but how does that equate to habitat condition? I think on Andrew, your assessment, you were saying the more chlorophyll A, worse condition. Are there subtleties in that?
I think the simple answer to the question is yes. We do need to do a lot more work on that, and clearly those relationships are also dependent on the water body that we're looking at as well. So it's not necessarily something that can be extrapolated between water bodies. But yes, you know, what we're seeing is obviously with increasing eutrophication, we get shifts of species within water bodies to less desirable ones. So we talked about cyanobacteria, for example, but also has wider implications as well within that water body. I think the simple answer is yes, we absolutely need to do that, and you know, we know that deteriorating water quality has big impacts in terms of the biodiversity, and that's one of the biggest challenges that we have, and clearly very high up at the moment in terms of our in terms of the media as well as you know, our priorities. But
okay, thank you very much.
Yep.
Shubha, did you have something you wanted to add on that?
If I might add, in fact, it's emerging more and more that phytoplankton and chlorophyll concentration can be used as indicators in many different ways for the status of the ecosystem and of the condition, as the question mentions. One particular aspect that I thought might be worth mentioning here, because it didn't come up, I don't think, during the workshop, is the relationship between say chlorophyll concentration or phytoplankton types and waterborne diseases. There is an with temperature and waterborne diseases. There's quite a body of work that shows that the phytoplankton dynamics can be related to the presence of environmental Vibrio cholerae responsible for cholera in waters. And we have a project now ongoing in a lake in India. And what we see there is that this relationship can change quite dramatically from one season, well, not maybe from one season to another, but certainly from one part of the lake to another. So while there is a relationship, we don't quite understand how it works. But it is evident that in many places, at least, if not in all places, the bacteria attach themselves to the phytoplankton as part of their survival mechanism. So there's that to understand better. There is the fact that the more we look at it, the more we see that the ecosystems are structured in a highly organized fashion, but it might change from one location to another. And under climate stress, we don't know if this integrity will be maintained. So these are all big questions of the day, and monitoring chlorophyll would be an important part of investigating that.
Okay, thank you very much, Shubha. That does remind me, we had a very interesting talk about that, using Earth observation to monitor Vibrio in that specific example at a DEFRA Earth Observation Centre of Excellence meeting, and it's really interesting to hear it again now as a research and development priority. So thank you for adding that, because I say it's something we did consider it. You know, we would have liked to include that in the workshop, and that's something that we would like to take forward. Things that we haven't, so we're running out of time now, so the things that we haven't managed to discuss will of course be reported in our report on the workshop, and I think hopefully, John, can also be taken forward for discussion at the Centre of Excellence workshop in November that you mentioned, you know, if any of those that are relevant to that. Thank you. I'm actually going to have to wind things up now, so I want to say thank you very much to all our panel members for all your input on that session. That was absolutely brilliant. Thank you to all our speakers for the excellent presentations we've heard today and yesterday, and of course to our keynote speakers yesterday who set the context so well for the rest of the workshop. I think Emily and I would like to say a very big thank you to everyone who helped us plan the content for the workshop. We just couldn't have done this without all the help and advice we got from staff at PML, Stirling University, SEPA and CFAS, so thank you to them. And also I'd like to add thank you to Lauren Bierman and Ollie Clements from Plymouth Marine Laboratory, who ran the training sessions this morning and yesterday morning, which were an absolute huge success. Videos from those and other information should be available on our website next week as well, for people who missed them. And I want to say thank you to everyone else who's attended and participated so enthusiastically with all the questions and suggestions. Sorry again that we didn't manage to cover everything, but we will get things into the report and try to get answers to as many as possible. Based on the information we had from Eventbrite, we've had bookings from 36 different countries and a really good mix of sectors. So it's great to see such interest. It is testimony to how important this topic is, and of course to the really high quality of speakers that we had on the programme, so thank you very much to them. I hope you found the workshop useful and interesting. I certainly have. Hope you've enjoyed yourselves. And if you could please let us know what you thought by filling in our short online survey form. Emily has put the link to this in the chat. It will also be sent around via email after the event. All the feedback is anonymous and it will really help us to plan future meetings. As I've said, the recordings and slides will be available on our website. We'll try and get those up next week. So with that, I'm going to close the meeting. Thank you all very much and goodbye. Have a lovely evening.